If I can start in my usual way, I'm Councillor Jim McKenna and I will be chairing today's meeting. Can I ask the clerk now to switch on the webcast at this stage? John?
It's on, Chair.
Thank you. Could I just remind everybody we were holding this meeting in a way that is COVID secure, so please feel safe where you're sitting. And in accordance with social distancing guidelines, which means everyone present is appropriately spread out and has been allocated a specific seat. Today's meeting is being live streamed on the City Council's YouTube channel so that the public can observe the meeting without needing to be present. City Plans panel deal with applications from the city centre as well as the largest and most significant application the council's received. The aim of the panel is to hear all the relevant information from applicants, members of the public, council officers, to help members of the panel make their decision. Before I begin, could I remind members that the 90-minute rule has been removed, but it would be good practice that if the room gets to a temperature that makes staff and visitors uncomfortable, then a welfare break may be needed to allow the room to ventilate. Could I now invite members and officers to introduce themselves and mute your microphones once you have done so? Can I start on my left with Daljit, please?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Daljit Singh. I lead the City Centre planning team. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nash?
Elizabeth Nash, representing Hunslet and Riverside.
Peter?
Councillor Peter Carlill from Carvely and Farsley Wood.
Thanks, Peter. Caroline?
Councillor Caroline Gruen from Bramley and Stanningley.
Thanks, Caroline, and welcome, Sharon.
Hello, Chair. I'm Councillor Sharon Hamilton. I'm subbing today for Councillor Garthwaite, and I represent Meanwood and Moortown Ward.
Thank you, Sharon. Neil?
Afternoon, everybody. Councillor Walshaw, Headingley and High Park Ward.
Kaylee, please.
Councillor Kaylee Brooks, Little London and Woodhouse Ward.
John Carr, please.
Good afternoon, Jonathan Carr, Head of Development Management.
You can introduce yourself at the back.
Good afternoon. My name is Lewis Footy. I'm the Technical Support Manager and I'll be in charge of the PowerPoint today.
Councillor David Blackburn, Farnley Wortley Ward.
Colin?
Councillor Colin Campbell, really excited to be back in the 6 and 7 and really pleased the 90-minute rules finished so we can all speak as long as we like.
You don't necessarily have to exceed that 90 minutes.
Councillor Paul Wadsworth representing Guys in Road Ward.
And finally, Graham, please.
Councillor Graham Latty, also representing Guiseley and Rawdon Ward.
Graham, moving on to item number 1. Can I call the clerk? John, please.
Thank you, Chair. Under agenda item 1, there were no appeals against the refusal or inspection of documents. Under agenda item 2, there are no items which require the exclusion of the press or public. Under agenda item 3, late items, I am unaware of any late items of business. Under agenda item 4, could I ask members to declare any interest they may have? I'll take that there is no interests. Agenda item 5, apologies for absence. Apologies for absence have been received from Councillor Cohen, Councillor Finnegan, Councillor Garthwaite. We've also got Councillor Sharon Hamilton stepping in for Councillor Garthwaite. Councillor Stevenson is on his way and he's subbing for Councillor Cohen.
Thank you, John. Moving on to agenda item 6, which is the minutes of the meeting held Thursday, the 8th of July. That was the 10:30 90-minute meeting. Can I go through them page by page then? Page 7, page 8, page 9, page 10, and page 11. Can we accept them as a true record? I see not. Any matters arising? Moving on then to the 1 p.m. meeting on the same day, starting on page 13, page 14, page 15, page 16, and page 17. Peter?
Thank you, Chair. I was looking for the button to put my hand up. In the set of comments members made on that, the second bullet point is all around the concerns we had around the school. There was the first one regarding if the school doesn't come forward, but the second one I think was around where the school was positioned in the safe access. I think that second point is quite a large issue as well as the first. So I wonder whether those could, one, I'd prefer it, and I don't know if other members agree, if that was separated out into a separate bullet point so they don't get conflated, those two issues. But I think the problem wasn't necessarily around the pickup, drop off and parking. It was around road safety really and safe access to the school. If the road safety concerns could be highlighted, I think that would be welcome, so that is an issue that obviously they take into account when that comes back.
Okay, I'm not sure if it was the general feeling that the location was wrong, but it was discussed. But again, it will come back to us and it's something to consider. Regarding the drop-off point, yes, it was an issue, but it was pointed out at the meeting that it wasn't part of the application and these things would be decided when that comes forward. But I'm quite willing to have a note put into that effect. Yep. Okay, Peter. Colin?
Just picking up on Peter's point, which I seem to recall, it really needs the resolved tweaking then, doesn't it? Because effectively the resolved doesn't, in many ways, doesn't quite reflect what the members' comments were, in my opinion. So I wouldn't want us to come back. I think we all agreed, didn't we, that the layout wasn't quite right in one form or another. And I wouldn't like it to come back with exactly the same layout, if you follow what I mean. Okay.
I'm quite happy to. Better put my thingy on. Moving on then to page 19. Again, I'll move on. 19, 20, 21, page 22, page 23, and finally page 24. Can we agree them as a correct record? Is there any matters arising? Okay then, thank you for that. Moving on then to agenda item 8 on page 25. Can I firstly bring in Daljit Singh, please, to update us?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, before the developers who are present here will present the proposals to you, I just wanted to clarify some matters and update you on further representations that we've received. The report refers to basement accommodation. However, there is no basement level accommodation proposed in this case. The proposed car parking and bin storage is going to take place at ground level, but is to be provided within the podium element of the development proposals that will be presented to you. The other clarification that I wanted to make was that paragraph 7.19 of the report implies that 7% of the total units will be provided as affordable housing. However, this is a build to rent proposal. And although the developer has indicated they can meet our affordable housing requirements in full, based on our current proposals, members will be aware that there is a level of flexibility in the options that could be chosen. And as yet, the developers have not confirmed which option they would like to take. So I just wanted to clarify that element. And then in terms of the update, since the report was published, we have received a representation from the directors of the City Island Management Company. This is a residential management company for a block of flats, City Island, which is sited across the river and canal to the northeast of the development site. They state that they have no issue in principle with the construction of residential buildings, but they are objecting to the emerging details. Their concerns summarised are that there has been no consultation or publicity in relation to the proposals, that the proposed buildings are significantly taller than the City Island development and other buildings in the surrounding area, and therefore will be overbearing, that there are no additional amenities coming along with the development, such as GP surgeries, childcare facilities, shops and bars to facilitate and serve the increased residential population. They have raised concerns about insufficient green space being provided on the site and the need to protect the local wildlife ecology. They've also pointed out that the development has potential to detract from the appearance of several listed buildings in the area. They point to the Monkbridge Viaduct, the St Anne's Lock, the Roundhouse buildings and Tower Works buildings as particular heritage assets to take into account, and request that English heritage are involved are consulted on the proposals. They also raise concerns about traffic generation. They think that the cumulative development on the former Doncaster Monkbridge site, this scheme, along with the other schemes that have been consented, would generate excess capacity for the road network. And finally, they point to noise disruption and the potential for disturbance during the construction period. They would like conditions to be placed on any consent, which require this to be managed and require an ongoing liaison with the City Island residents to minimise any adverse impact. I think as a brief response, members can take their own view following the presentation on the emerging design and the townscape impact of that. In terms of the detailed issues that have been raised about noise disruption, the impact of traffic generation, and the requirement for consultation, I do remind members this is a pre-application proposal. At formal application stage, we would undertake the normal publicity requirements, statutory requirements, and we would look at detailed aspects such as the need for any appropriate noise conditions. So there are issues that we're aware of, but at this stage, we're seeking members' views on the key principles of the emerging design. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for bringing those list of objections before us. I have to say, it's extremely rare that we have at this stage to actually have to consider such matters, which rightly belongs, as you say, for a full application, apart from design and layout. But we have noted it, and I'm sure we shall hear more as the plans develop, if indeed it does so. With that, then, can we invite the applicants to present their pre-app to us, please?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ian Emerson from CJCC Architects.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jennifer Mui, landscape architect with this project.
Pointer's not working. One sec.
It's important that members do hear what you're saying, so please. It's great technology when it works, isn't it?
This was all working 2 minutes ago. We tested it.
Hello. I'm sorry about that. Just a quick introduction to Hub. Hub, along with Bridges Fund Management, who are the UK's largest social impact fund, acquired 2 sites on the Latitude development in December last year. Site 1, referred to as Latitude Purple, has consent for 463 homes, and we're commencing works on site within the next 2 weeks with that development. It'll be a build to rent scheme. Hub and Bridges aspire to deliver developments. We deliver. We don't just buy land and sell it. We build out all our buildings, but we have the aspiration to deliver buildings that make a positive social and environmental impact in the communities we work in. We're here for the long term. We spent many years trying to find the right sites in Leeds, and we hope you like the developments in front of you, the proposals in front of you. So I'll pass over to Ian to take you through our initial ideas.
So this is a site location plan. We're obviously to the southwest of the city, adjacent to the commercial district. 10 minutes walk into the station, heart of the city centre, retail quarter. So 20 minutes to north of the city and the student sort of area of the city. Next slide. So this is the current site at the moment, fronted down one side by the Monkbridge Viaduct, the CDL scheme to the right of that, with the viaduct proposal coming forward as part of that development. And then this site sits vacant, as it has done for 15 years, brownfield site. Next slide, please. So this is the current consented master plan. So again, we've got Latitude Purple to the left, which Hub are delivering on site in the next couple of weeks. We have the Ground Plus 7 office, which is our site at the moment, Latitude Blue. This is a consented office scheme, which mirrors the BAM Yorkshire Post building at the front edge of the site. And then Monkbridge CDL scheme to the north, with which the viaduct is part of. Next slide, please. So again, we've got quite a sustainable location in terms of access in, both in terms of cycles, pedestrians, and vehicular access. This will be improved with the opening of the viaduct and the link back into the Wellington Place scheme, back into our site. There's 2 stairs that drop down adjacent to our site and bring you through to it. Next slide, please. And this is what the site once was. This is Monkbridge ironworks that existed until demolition circa 15 years ago. You know, variety of industrial processes happening on this site, iron parts for various pieces of industry within the city. Next, please. So we've been through quite a lengthy consultation process on this scheme. We met with Leeds City Council early in March. We've met 5 times since then, various consultation events and publication meetings. We've engaged with the Civic Trust and the Canal River Trust, and we've also spoke to the members of the public twice in webinar format, obviously due to COVID, and then we've held one-to-one COVID secure in-person consultations. Next slide, please. So this is the emerging sort of area with variously consented schemes, emerging proposals, and our site sat at the centre of it. We sit at the centre of the tall buildings opportunity zone, as outlined in the SPD, fronted to one side again by Monkbridge, to the back of our site by Latitude Purple, which we'll develop in a couple of weeks' time, and then various sort of developments coming up and around this site at the moment. Next slide, please. So in terms of how we've approached this site from a massing point of view, as mentioned, we sort of sit at the centre of this SPD tall buildings opportunity area. We feel this is appropriate for a marker building. It's in the middle, it's got natural breathing space to the north. You can't build there, so it gives the tall building sort of commensurate breathing space to one side of this. We've tried to consolidate the buildings so that you can open up as much of the ground plane as possible. There's commercial areas planned as part of the viaduct, and we'll open it up to that side so we can actually make use of these areas. And then the sort of stepping of the mass naturally steps up to this point in the area. Next slide, please. And that's how the proposal sits adjacent to the sort of emerging context that exists at the moment. Next, please. So in terms of plan form, we've approached this, it's 2 buildings on site, 2 tall buildings on site. We've then tried to get efficient forms use as little footprint as we can sensibly use. We've then chamfered these buildings and made degree of reference to historic forms on the site, and then we've reorientated things so we can look around each other, so we've got key views and nobody is compromised in terms of interface distances or outlook from their flats. Next slide, please. And then this is the emerging master plan. So again, latitude purple to the left of the image, and then latitude blue to the right of this. You can see here we're trying to pull away from that viaduct as much as possible and green as much of this area as we sensibly can do, while effectively to create public realm, valuable public realm, and activate the viaduct. You know, this new pedestrian route is going to be vital and fantastic for the city, but without a sort of terminus to it or a reason to walk across it, it doesn't feel like it's deemed to succeed in the same way. You know, this proposal aims to do that, aims to bring life back to this part of the canal, really, and sort of anchor the viaduct in with some use. Next slide, please. So in terms of assessing these views, we've taken a number of views locally around the sites. These have been backed up with heritage discussion. So these will form part of the heritage statement as well, these same key views. If you go to the next slide, please. So this is the view down the sort of main pedestrian access, the pedestrian spine that runs through the MEPC Wellington Place site, the viaduct at the end of the site. To the right, the Monkbridge development, our scheme just sits off that access to the left. Next slide, please. Looking down Globe Road, looking west towards the site. So Get Living is in the sort of foreground to the left. We're in the background on the right, center of the screen. Next, please. Looking from Whitehall Road, looking west towards the site. The final block in the foreground is the MEPC, final part of the Wellington Place master plan. We sort of sit behind that at the moment. Next slide, please. Springwell Road, looking north, so you can see latitude purple in the foreground, stepping up to latitude blue behind. Get Living to the right. Next slide, please. Then from the Lock Gate, looking back east towards the site, Monkbridge in the foreground. We're sort of sat behind that. Next slide, please. And then from Water Lane, looking back across the elevated rail line, back across Get Living with their sort of tallest element to the right of the screen and the sort of center of the screen behind there. Next slide, please. And then from the canal, sort of bend of the canal as you come past Whitehall Road, looking back towards the site, Monkbridge in the background, Get Living in the foreground to the left. Next slide, please. We've then also addressed key city views, so city square views, public space views to assess impact from these, you know, important places within the city centre. Next slide, please. So Millennium Square, where the blue dashed outline sits behind the town hall down there. Next slide, please. Park Square, again, we sort of sit in the shadow, everything over can't be seen from this point of view. Next slide, please. City Square, we slightly emerged just there in the centre of that image in blue. Again, I'm aware there's a consented development in the foreground here, recently consented, which may affect that situation. Next slide, please. The railway footbridge looking back across the railway line. This is a sort of emerging picture with the CG scheme to the left, sort of various bits of Get Living tapering off towards our site, which is in blue to the right of the image. Next slide, please. And then Sovereign Square looking back towards the site with the sort of blue hatch again behind the building there. Next slide, please. And then the elevated railway line as you come round the bend back towards the site or away from towards the site, and Get Living in the foreground, and we sort of pop between those two buildings at that point. Next slide, please. And then a sort of view along the canal looking back towards the proposal with the emerging context. Next slide, please. So these sections sort of illustrate the emerging context, developing context in the area based on what we've seen already within the presentation. So the top is moving west to east. So again, you can see Middle Mills stepping up to one side. You've got the CUG scheme in the foreground dashed. Then as you move through to Get Living, latitude blue, and then Monkbridge adjacent to it, you sort of get a sense of this up and down with the massing. You know, there are taller buildings behind us and it's adjacent to us. And we're trying to sit, admittedly, at the taller end of the emerging context, but in a way that moves up and down sensitively with this this emerging context. And then the bottom slide is moving north to south, so city centre to the left, moving back towards the outskirts of the city on the right. You can see latitude purple stepping up, the sort of shadow of latitude purple sort of stepping back up to our site, the foreground. Springwell Gardens to the far right of the image, and then CEG to the left. It's a tall building. Next slide, please. This is the emerging ground floor plane, effectively. So the ideas here are to pull away from the viaducts that we discussed. There are commercial units consented within the viaduct proposal already. So we're moving away from that to try and create public realm here. You can see the stair tower to the top right of, well, top center of the image as part of the CDL scheme, which will bring people down into this space. And the idea is to create, open public realm that addresses these arches and makes them viable as commercial propositions and activates this space. Again, down the canal, we're looking to pull away from the canal and create eddies and pockets of space and bring life back onto that section of the canal, which currently is a dead end. Next slide, please. These are the key principles: active frontages, lay-by access for service vehicles and routes through the site. Next slide, please.
So in developing the layout of the public realm and the landscape, we looked at the likely ways that pedestrians would move through the site from Whitehall through to the canal. And that's primarily along the viaduct and a secondary access connecting between latitude red and blue. And we're also looking at the canal side access, how we get down to the lower level of the canal and making sure that all our levels work out so that the access is accessible. Truly. And we also looked at the sight lines that will create a sense of inclusion and safety in these public spaces, and that's guided the development of the layout that follows. Next slide, please. And this is the landscape design as we have it currently. The central public space area that is opened up by the massing of this building is primarily public space. It's all publicly accessible, and most of it is given over actively to the public realm. So that's the area in front of the viaduct, which will offer some spill out space, the main circulation, the main pedestrian route through from east to west, and then a bowl, a lawn, and that's framed by some mounded planting that separates the largely public area, the predominantly public area, from the forecourt to the residential buildings. And along the canal, you can see as we move from the upper levels down to the canal, have some level changes from the podium terrace amenity down to the residential forecourt, separated by some mounded planting, some ecologically oriented planting with a bowl of the lawn, and then finally getting to the landscape outside the viaduct spillouts. And the two sections here show that descent. The lower section, the section BB, shows how we are prioritizing the pedestrian walkway along the canal with some eddy spaces pulling away from the canal so that we don't have, or to avoid a conflict of movement versus resting and gathering spaces. And then you see the level changes as we move up through the building.
And this is sort of key view of that central space as we're trying to create it at the moment. So spill out space from the arches to the left-hand side, the sort of front lawn area, this opens public space, and then obviously beyond that, these active frontages that sit at the back of the building looking back out to this space. Then the upper level terraces looking back across site. Next, please. The upper level of the podium space will house 372 cycles, about 75% compared with our apartment numbers, and plant space. So this will be accessible, high quality cycling space with a bit of amenity space looking back onto the canal. Next, please. And then the upper level with the degree of communal amenity and terrace space, terracing back down to the route between latitude blue and red and back down towards the canal with sort of views back across the public space. The idea is to create multi-level activity here. So the viaduct creates activity at upper level, you have lower level activity in the sort of central space, your activity on the podium, and it steps up and down, it greens and creates a level of biodiversity that doesn't exist on the site at the moment. Next slide, please. And this is how that terracing works in a sort of 3D sense, and how we envisage the site, sort of ground plane, moving up and down. I think from this you can see that the intention to open up bits of the canal, open up the space on the canal and create use in there, it could be a really interesting idea and a really interesting way of activating this part of the canal in a way that doesn't currently exist, I think. Also, we're addressing directly onto the canal, we're dropping it onto the canal level. Rather than building a wall as the scheme next to us does in latitude red, we're dropping onto the canal to open up directly onto this. Next slide, please. And that's the view from the canal looking back in towards the public space and the canal frontage. Next slide, please. So elevationally, we've looked at key principles. It's about verticality, it's about slender forms, it's about recognizable buildings. They should be recognizable in part of the cityscape. Next slide, please. So as an architectural treatment, we've proposed something that is, there's 3 orders to it. There's a primary vertical order, which accentuates the vertical form. There is a secondary horizontal piece, which creates an aperture, which is about being well proportioned. It's about 2/3 to 1/3. It's about windows that are sensibly proportioned with this and ordered and organized. And then it's about creating a sense of residential language. It's about brick and it's about things that are of this city. Next slide, please. We've done quite an audit of the city centre and brick. This is only one slide. Part of this is quite a lot more to it. But we've looked at brick types, brick colours. Next slide, please. And extracted a palette of materials that we want to look at taking forward as part of this scheme. Next slide, please. We have then looked at amenity. So with tall buildings, we're looking to put amenity, private amenity, balconies and Juliet balconies where they're useful to residents. So they're not being affected by wind. They will be usable balconies at sensible levels. This is then supplemented by communal amenity and shared amenity, which provides the rest of the private outdoor amenity. Next slide, please. So in terms of the upper levels, we have got a mix at the moment of 498 units of 12% studios, 35% 1-beds, 45% 2-beds, and 7% 3-beds. We're proposing policy compliant affordable provision as part of this scheme on site. We're looking at M43 provision at policy compliant 2%. We're looking at M42 provision at about 90%, so way above the 30% policy compliance point. We've also increased the percentage of 3-beds through the pre-application process by 2.5%. Next slide, please. And that's us. Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation. I'm absolutely sure members will want to ask some questions. So can I invite members to indicate by placing your hands in the air? And I've seen Kaylee first. It's so original, isn't it? After electronic hands. When you're ready, Kaylee, I'll try to.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's a bit strange, isn't it? Actually putting your hand up rather than pressing a button. Yeah, so I think initial comments really. I'm interested in how you've come up with 7% for 3-bed. Is that based on need? What kind of affordables product are you planning on delivering? And then I thought it was interesting that you mentioned the word slender, because I was actually thinking as I was looking at the sort of images that they could be more slender. There seems a bit of something off about them. So yeah.
Okay, Damien, do you want to go on the affordable?
Yeah, sure. In terms of, I'll start with the 3-beds actually. Yeah, in terms of 3-beds, it is a need. So we did originally have 5% 3-beds, and through consultation, it was clear that there was a need for more 3-beds. This will be a rental building. So we've designed our 3-beds in a way that are suitable for families, but also suitable for sharers. And the percentage is still under consideration. And there is an opportunity to increase the number of 3-beds, but we feel we want to ensure that the homes, there is a market, we can rent them. We don't want to be left with empty homes. So at the moment, we think 7.5% is the correct number. In terms of affordable housing, as Daljit referred to, we're looking at both options in terms of being policy compliant. We'll be delivering a 10-year blind affordable housing offer. We do it across all our schemes, and it'll be pepper potted around the scheme. So it's no poor door. It's all sim entrance, sim finish, but the exact nature of the affordable housing will continue dialogue with officers. Again, it'll be driven by ensuring that it meets the needs of the local authority, but also that we can rent the homes. Ian, do you want to cover the point on slenderness?
So yeah, in terms of slenderness, I think the idea of the architecture, the floor plate, we've got a sensible deliverable scheme on a floor plate. So the idea is then to try and use the architecture to slender this proportion out. So it's about taking the verticality of the brickwork, effectively making that a dominant element. So you read verticals within that, rather than, you know, creating a flat facade. It's about projecting vertical that starts giving shadow and actual verticality to something. So the sort of floor plan is set about the number of apartments you need to get around a core to make that work, to make it a deliverable scheme. I think that's the key to it, that this is deliverable at the moment. So then it's working with the architecture to really stretch that, you know, visually try and stretch that to make it something that is slender within the horizon. I think that you're right, the viewpoint is key to it all, and how you view this thing. So I think the slenderness is about materiality, and it's about form of the actual elevations ultimately.
Thank you. Moving on then, Graham, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just before I ask my questions, I think this has been a perfect example of not having a site visit. You know, an awful lot of what's been talked about and the views and etc. would have been so much better if we'd been walking around there this morning. But anyway, before this, I'll be very quick, but the Wellington train station, that was the central station, not the Wellington station. And I toddled up the ramp to that many times when it was open. Anyway, parking for 22 cars and 372 bikes. You know, how do you arrive at that? So I know that we as a council would like to see cars banished forever, but in the real world, people do actually use motor cars. And I just wonder, for 400 and odd apartments, flats, whether 22 cars is you know, a practical sort of figure. Just moving down, you indicate that the elevational treatment is predominantly brick. Is this bricks as we know them, or are these panels that have brick facings? You've covered the bit about number of 3 beds, 2 beds, etc. But 3-bed flats would attract families, presumably. What floors are those on? I'd be interested to know. And because, of course, with children, it's not necessarily a good idea to be at the very top. And that also raises a point that I didn't see anywhere that there's anything to stop anybody running out of these flats and straight into the canal or from any of the surrounding streets. It's a fair point, you know, that people do that sort of thing. Go on to page 28, and we're looking at applications over the years. And the word that crops up a bit effectively is basically an approved application that's not been built. Are you, what sort of, not guarantee, but confidence do we have that you really actually want to build this? Because over the years, that site, we've sat and looked at so many proposals for it, and Sweet Fanny Adams happens. In fact, that's true of an awful lot that we pass at this panel, and I just wonder whether we could have a little bit of confidence about that. Right. The only other thing, this is a question for officers, really. Once again, the question of design has cropped up. We were going to have a design panel. Are we ever going to get it? Anyway, that's enough for now.
Thank you, Graham. There's quite a lot there. Please, if you...
Yes, I'll start with the easiest ones first. The canal and falling in. I mean, I suppose the basic point we've got is that we're not putting ramps into the scheme. It's a slope landscape. So there's no danger of prams or cycles rolling off down into the canal. And at no other point on the canal do you have a barrier, I don't think, that I can think of.
Not on the canal. You never see a fence at the side of the canal, no. But I'm thinking about behind the walkway, or just something to break children's progress to the water.
I think we will look at a texture of material on the landscape, and it will comply with the latest building regulations. We don't want to introduce unnecessary barriers, but it's a valid point. We'll take it away and work it up in detail.
I think the danger of putting too much in the way is that what essentially we're trying to create is a public space that's welcoming and inviting, and it's trying to drag people into the space to activate things, ultimately creating successful bits of city, additional new bits of city. I think once you start putting barriers to that and fences, it naturally becomes somebody else's and not a public space. So we're trying to avoid that. But I think the point's valid. We don't want people running into the canal, anyone falling in, obviously, particularly children and prams and bicycles and whatnot. The second point, cars versus bicycles. I mean, this is an enormously sustainable location within the city. And Leeds' policy, the climate emergency and everything else, if this site cannot be a low car site, I struggle to see where we could put a low car parking site, really. We're proposing a lot of bicycles because unless you provide the bicycle spaces, people aren't going to cycle. Something's got to come first. It's either the infrastructure of the bicycles, and we think this is a progressive move to actually encourage people to cycle more. And if we don't do that, we're never going to get anywhere with taking cars off the streets. I think that's it. I understand your concerns. I do understand your concerns. People drive at the moment, but something has to change somewhere.
I think just to add to that, in our experience and having built rent schemes around the UK, we end up with large empty car parks. We do have a site next door that's got consent and there's 100 car parking spaces. And from our research and our experience, we anticipate most of them being empty. And we're reluctant to deliver a large car park here that's ultimately very expensive to start digging in the ground, affects viability. And we would rather invest in sustainable means of transport, car club spaces, all electric charging points in these car parking spaces. It comes from our funding source, but also a true belief that this is a central site. And just to back up what Ian said, we truly believe that the people will be staying here. We will be encouraging walking, cycling, and sit car.
The next point I've got on my list, sorry if I miss any of these, do shout because there's quite a few. 3 beds and the floors that 3 beds are on. At the moment, we're trying to push it to the bottom of the building, as you suggest, as much as possible, because like you say, 3-bed flats will predominantly be either sharers or families, and families don't want to go up 30 flights of stairs or a lift to 30 floor. That's just, good practice, I think, and we'll take that on board, make sure that happens. The next point was on deliverability. I think once this is put forward as an application, we will be on site with Latitude Purple. It's due to start in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I guess I'll take this one. Hub and Bridges, we build out all our developments. We take a long-term view and investment in the cities we work in. We have 5,000 homes either complete or under development at the moment. We've never sold a site. We've built everything out. And I think, we'll be proving that, I hope, within the next 2 to 3 weeks with starting on site with Latitude Purple on a neighbouring site. We get into a great level of detail at this stage on these schemes because we want to ensure they are deliverable. And with increasing construction costs and so on, it is challenging, but we consider great detail how we build these buildings from day one to make sure they are deliverable. I think that also comes on to your point about real bricks versus a brick slip system. We're a huge fan of real bricks. We, as I say, we looked at this as a 20, 30-year business plan. We want to build buildings that stand the test of time, and real bricks stand the test of time. That has to be caveated at what will bricks be available at the time. We always struggle to buy bricks, but our aspiration at the moment is to build this from real bricks.
Graham, of course, you raised a really good point about site visits, and speaking for myself as chair, nobody else, I haven't talked to officers, but I hope to resume site visits at our next meeting. If members feel a bit squeamish about travelling on a bus, they can always use their own cars and meet us on site, can't they? There's ways around it. And the other point you make is a very good one. It's come up in the last 15 months about materiality. We certainly would like to see samples of the brick, when it comes back to us again, so we can make a judgment that isn't on paper, we can see the real thing. So thank you for raising those points, Graham.
I just add something to that. I think if there was appetite and anybody wants to see the site, we're open to take people around, you know, in sort of extraordinary manner. If you we're keen to do so, we're happy to do that.
There's a question from Graham. He did mention the design panel, and it is a question to officers. We haven't got David here, but it's in the process of happening. I don't know how soon, but it's something we can raise. No, it's not Steve, is it?
Chair, if I could just comment on that. It was something that I think Mark Burgess originally was tasked with bringing to fruition, but obviously Mark subsequently retired last year, and I'm not sure, given the pandemic, that much progress has been made on that recently, but it is still there as a task to be completed, and for those design panels to be brought to fruition, as I say, in the near future, hopefully, now that we're sort of resuming a level of normality. And just to say, in terms of the site visits, we are working on a risk assessment for them at the moment. As you know, all activities do have to have a risk assessment first. It's got to be approved and consulted through the unions as well. So hoping to get that in place in the next couple of weeks to enable panels to resume next month, next time round.
Chairman, couldn't we just sign a disclaimer and go on a site visit?
I'm sure we can arrange that. There's a ways around. After all, we have opened up, haven't we? You know. Okay, moving on then. Peter, can I invite you in now, please?
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions about specific points. I'll make one point from my own view, just to make sure that the applicant's getting the views of all members. I mean, I'm perfectly supportive of the number of car parking spaces that you've got. I don't see any reason for you to own a car if you're there. And I think on an aside to that, this is obviously a managed build to rent scheme. So if somebody rents an apartment without a car parking space, then it's up to them to find somewhere to put their car that's somewhere else. Obviously, there will be some people who may need a car for mobility reasons, etc., and I'm sure then they'd get allocated one. But I see no difficulty with a low number of car parking spaces at this site. Just in terms of looking at it, I'm struggling with the levels a little bit. I was wondering if somebody could talk me through how somebody would access the cycle storage if they were coming in on a bike. And then one other question I've got just around some of the green space. You've got that nice little lawn outside that connects to the possible businesses that might be under the arches. I don't know where the nearest play areas or anything like that are in this area, but I'm wondering whether you consider maybe some sort of informal play area around there. I'm thinking of the kind of thing we've got in Leeds Dock, where there's just a couple of bits of equipment, not too much to block progress, but something for the kids that hopefully will live in this development with their families.
Absolutely, thank you for that question. In terms of informal play, absolutely, we consider most of the public area and the open space that we're creating to be playable. So it wouldn't be cordoned off and fenced off as play space in the dedicated sense, but in terms of incidental and informal play, so integrated into the landscape, everything playable. Ideally, no poisonous plants unless they blew in, you know, things like that, all those kinds of considerations. In terms of levels, yeah.
In terms of levels, so the site steps up from the canal. Obviously, the canal is a low point on the site, and there's a change in levels of about 1.5 to 2 meters across the sort of diagonal of the site. We're looking at building on top of it rather than excavating and bulk excavating, taking things off site. So the idea is the lower level sits down, the lowest level sits at the canal on the front edge, which addresses that directly. And then the main part of the podium sits up at an accessible level beyond that, that's commensurate with the viaduct arches effectively. So there's a change in level you can see on that drawing there in front of you. There's a change in level with a gentle 1 in 20 sloped ramp back up into the viaduct link back to the north and south. And then you have a stepped route back with that as well. So it's fully accessible across the site, back up into the site effectively.
You want to come back? Sure.
Just the last bit about how you'd access that cycle parking. Is there a level access into that from the level?
There is a oversized stair with a gully going up to it and access to a lift to take you up there if you need to. But effectively, we're looking at a very wide stair, gentle rise on it with a gully. This was all really, I mean, we looked at hazards at ground floor as part of the design process, but obviously trying to give back that public realm. you're faced with an opportunity to, if you can move that away from there, you give the public realm back as space, and we felt that's more important. It's a priority.
Sharon, please. Did I see your hand go up? Maybe I didn't then. I had a lot of hands going up at once. Neil, please.
Thanks, Chair. It is good to be back meeting in person again, isn't it? I mean, a lot of the points I wanted to raise have been touched upon already, which is great. Just quite seized by Councillor Latty's concern that thousands of tenants will run screaming from your buildings and into the canal. I think some kind of cunning large net on a metal extractor arm, I think, might be something to consider. Sorry, Graham, I couldn't resist Councillor Latty. I'm really sorry. I think just looking forward to looking forward to the full application. I think because it's brick, and I do like the verticality of the brick columns. I think that's really strong. But the sort of the inset brick, the detail brick, I think we'd really like to see samples, and samples with as high a degree of surety that this is what you're going to be able to purchase as possible, because brick covers a multitude of colours, shades and sins, doesn't it? And textures and types. And sometimes we've had really great samples, and then when you see the building, it's like, that's that red municipal toilet block brick from the 1970s. So we have a few concerns like that. Leeds, as Chair points out many times, Leeds is sometimes a brick city. So we're just extra careful these days as City Plans panel. But no, a lot of this is really rather good. It's a good presentation, particularly like I said, the verticality, the design. My concerns are usually affordables and then climate and energy. And so when coming forward with the full application, really keen to get into the details of how you're going to address carbon, energy and climate and all those issues that are inextricably bundled together, particularly how individual flats will get hot water. That's key issues for a moment. Obviously, the government deadline for phasing out of individual gas boilers is looming hard, and there's an awful lot of technological development going on at the moment. So keen to see a lot of detail about that, because that's a key concern for us. So really, Chair, it's just those points. Other comments have been touched upon. Oh, actually, yes. I do agree in terms of your provision of parking and bikes. Absolutely. If we can't get car-free living here, where are we going to do it? And I think in Leeds, we're moving towards a much better situation with regards to public transport. We're looking at a much more London type approach to transport, which is 30 years overdue, but we're going to get there, and that's all to the good with the new mayor, with Mayor Brabin. So I think just on that, what provision are you, just apart from just loads of pointers for the full application, have you got any sense of how you're going to approach e-bikes? Because as Climate Emergency Committee Chair, I keep talking about the coming e-bike revolution. I wish I had £5 for every time I've used it in a speech or a response to a constituent. So how are you addressing e-bikes? And out of all of that, that is my one definite question. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. There was a couple of questions, but it was mainly comments. Welcome as they are. We just remind members we're still on questions. Please, when you can answer it.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Richard Murphy from Masodi. We're highway consultants based in Leeds. Very simple answer to your question. We're looking at the new draft SPD that's coming, and we will be policy compliant on the e-bikes. We'll also be looking to make sure that bicycles for use by non-able-bodied people can also access electricity. We will be policy compliant, but we will have the ducting in to make sure that if we need to, we can expand that. So there won't be a risk of people wanting an e-bike, but with nowhere to charge it.
Richard, you certainly started a conversation at this end of the table, and it simply went a question from me. Do we have a policy on e-bikes? And Dalja didn't know, but he did say, if you've mentioned it, we must have. So, so we'll have to tease that one out a little bit, won't we, Graham? But thank you for that comment, Richard. I know, I have you down, Liz.
Hello there, I'm James Bryce from Max Fordham. We're I could talk a little bit about the energy strategy. Quite a lot of work has gone into that already. It's important to look at the whole of the energy strategy in the round. So the first thing that I'd like to do, and we do with them, is obviously reduce the demand on from site. So there's a highly efficient building fabric proposed with heat recovery, ventilation. Also, there's no intention of putting mechanical cooling in. So in order to achieve that, we need to minimize the window sizes so there's not too much solar gain into the dwellings. A real benefit of smaller windows is there's more walls which are much more thermally efficient than the windows. So the first thing we focus on is reducing that demand. It's also important for us not to be installing any gas on site. So the proposal is for no fossil fuels on site. Thank you.
Certainly, your questions brought out some interesting issues. Maybe we should be looking at policies on e-scooters as well, Neil. They seem to be growing a lot. Moving on then and being a bit more serious, can I bring in Caroline, please?
Thank you, Chair.
Good introduction.
I was pleased to see that you designed balconies into the development. And I think I know what a projecting balcony provision is and what a Juliet balcony is. I don't know what an operable spandrel window is. Could you explain what that is?
And do we have a policy on it?
Okay. Also, I'd just like to point, I'm not a personal fan of studios at all. And I just wondered if you could give us an idea of the sort of layout and amenity that they will offer. And personally, I would like to see the number of studios reduced. I think it's too many. It's not a mode of living that I think we want to promote in the city particularly. I'd like to emphasise Councillor Latty's point about a design panel, because I think this development would be absolutely ideal for such a panel to engage in. And, you know, I'm sure we could make something really special out of it. Echo the points made on climate change. For a development of this size, in a city of this size, with the innovation and the empathy with the environment that you're showing, we would expect an equal level of innovation with the climate change strategies, and hopefully at the next stage we'll see those coming forward. And did I hear somebody talking about reducing window size as one of those measures? Because that would...
It's about providing appropriate window sizes to get lighting without excessive solar gain. So providing light where it's valuable. You know, so there's no point providing light at 200 mil off the ground because it's not doing anything. It's providing light where an entry into the building where it's helpful, it provides.
Okay, those are my questions, Chair.
So studio provision, the studio layout, we don't have it in this presentation because we've had to condense it to 10 minutes, which we failed to achieve quite miserably. But the studio apartment is the same as a one-bed apartment, less a wall. So it's exactly the same space standard. It's nationally described space standards for a one-bed in effect, and it works in the same way as a one-bed flat, less a wall. So it's really about choice of tenure, I suppose, for whoever wants to rent it. Ultimately, it's...
Yeah, I think the studios, we've designed it in a way that the bedroom area is more flexible. So we essentially have folding walls. So if someone chooses to open up the space to have more living space, we're just conscious in a hopefully soon to be post-COVID world, how people use the homes dramatically changed. It's now a place where people work and people homeschool. So in some of our developments and aspirations going forward, we want to build in as much flexibility as possible to these homes. So our studios here are essentially a one bed, but what movable walls to allow more flexibility.
And that's at the upper levels where balconies are appropriate and you have fully openable windows so you can get air in at an appropriate level and you have the sense of outdoors, albeit it's not sensible at 20 stories up to have a balcony because they're not used at that point. Generally, nobody wants to sit on a projecting balcony at 20 stories, I don't imagine, in this room.
Thank you. But in that case, I am disappointed there aren't more balconies because it's a really valuable facility. And I think we've just been through 18 months of a period which proves just how important it is to have outdoor access.
I think we would also be keen to have more balconies, but we're trying to balance that with some of the studies we're doing, particularly the wind analysis and so on. So we tried to balance that by having projecting balconies and then Juliet balconies, and then higher up where it's quite challenging to have actually, the perception of opening up a window so if people get that, fresh air in, views out, and the idea of their living room becomes a recessed balcony. It's something we're still looking at to put more balconies on this building because, as I say, we want to deliver homes that people want to rent, and outside space has never been more important. We're also delivering lots of communal space here and communal external space. We really encourage within our communities for people to use those spaces. You know, the way we design those are different now till years ago, because we want to be able to keep them open in a COVID situation. And the intention would be that they're designed in a way that they're welcoming and they encourage people to mix.
Thank you. Moving on, Councillor Nash. Elizabeth, please.
We've heard this afternoon how members are very keen on cycling in this city. I personally am very keen on walking in this city. And the development of the viaduct has been mooted for years and years now for people to walk along it. I appreciate it's important as a linear park for the local residents. But looking at the map on page 41 of the agenda, I've just measured the length of it and it's a mere 150 metres, which is hardly a long way. And although it's not your responsibility, but I wonder if it could be extended over the rail line to make it a real walk, perhaps as far as Elland Road. And just a final point, I noticed the illustrations about trees growing on the viaduct. I don't know what sort of trees you're going to plant there, but it will need quite a lot of soil to sustain trees. So I should be glad when the time is right to have a list of the tree species. Thank you.
The viaduct isn't within our control. It's part of the CDL scheme. It's been delivered as part of the Monkbridge scheme to the right of that image, effectively. That's been consented. It's under construction as we speak and it's delivered as part of the section 106, I understand, on the Monkbridge scheme. And I think it's part of the practical completion on that scheme anyway. So that's beyond our control. In terms of the length of that, just for reference, I suppose, it pretty much matches Briggett in terms of its length. And it does connect back to the MEPC scheme. And I believe there is an application for a staircase on the MEPC site as we speak. So it will connect down to that. And it does connect down through the MEPC site. So that's the viaduct. In terms of our site, we've 250 metres as part of our site, Councillor Nash. 46.
So within our site.
Sorry, Chair, I know I'm knocking on a bit and I might be getting hard of hearing, but I do find it difficult. And I wonder if the microphones could be turned up, please. Because, you know, some of the comments are just down this end just sound like a mumble.
Is this any better? If I lean in? Okay, super. So within our site, we have an open space of about 46 meters by roughly 25 meters, which is about 1,000 square meters of new open space. The planting that we're looking at will be very much developed in sympathy with the riverine habitats. It is a contaminated site, and so we do have to limit the way the plants and the trees can root into the ground. But we are looking and taking very seriously the soil volumes and depths that will be required so that this becomes a real landscape that grows over time, that thrives over time, and we're not putting in little small trees just to die slowly. So working hand in hand with the ecologists for very sympathetic planting to grow long term.
Thank you, and apologies for being late, Chair. Evidently, I made the mistake of driving here from Wetherby instead of cycling, and the roads were hectic. Looking at the questions we've been asked, I have two questions. First of all, on the proposed mix of, or the acceptability of the 1 and 2 bedroom units, and we've mentioned COVID, but the part of the city that I represent has seen an exponential rise in house sales recently. And the data behind that shows that it's everybody fleeing from the city and from other cities in the country as well, because they want access to outdoor space and amenity. So I wonder if somebody could give some comment on the actual market at the minute, whether you think there is going to be demand for units without outdoor space of their own, given that we've seen a rise in people trying to move out of such accommodation and move out to parts of the city that have more outdoor space. And the second point was regarding emerging proposals for design, scale, form and detailing. I have no comment on scale and form, but I do on design and detailing. And I'm conscious that somebody's put a lot of work into this, and when it's your plan and an elected councillor comes along, gives you their views, it's probably less than helpful, but I will anyway. I think had the design brief been to replicate Peckham's Nelson Mandela House using the windows of my 1960s science block at school, it would have probably been bang on. And I'm just not sure whether we've got enough information around the detailing of this sort of lattice type brick here and the windows. And I'm actually more interested to know where that came from. Is there somewhere else in the city that you've seen? You've shown us some examples, but they don't really replicate that. So it might be just the CGI is not good. But I'd like some further background on that, please.
Welcome to the meeting. You weren't here when we went around the table, but you're very welcome. Thank you.
I think the brickwork's developing. There are precedents around town that do have the sort of projecting or alternate colour bricks with a sort of headed Flemish bond. The elevation's developing. We're at plans panel stage and we're here to garner opinion. And I accept your comments, so we're going to develop that through, obviously. But yeah, it's a developing theme and it is trying to extract things from the local environment. There's a lot more in terms of the brickwork study we've done, but obviously because of my 10-minute presentation, which I failed to give, there's we've cut that down necessarily. But yeah, we certainly, when it comes back the application stage, we'll show a lot more of that and resolve that. And the second point.
Yeah, I'll take the point about in terms of demand for this product. Obviously, we carried out a huge amount of research before investing in the city, particularly the neighbouring site, which we're due to start on. Based on the research, there's never been, a greater demand for good quality purpose-built rental homes in Leeds city centre. It's got a great retention in terms of student numbers. There's huge numbers of people relocating back to Leeds, and there's a demand for people wanting to downsize and live in city centres. We've looked at other built-to-rent schemes in the city centre, and the majority of them are now 100% let with a waiting list for these type of homes. I completely agree with your point about the home and external space, and it's something that we need to continue to work on, particularly with this type of development. We do need to design homes in the future, and we do need to design them with good quality external space. But I do think that an element of that can be shared. And we really want to encourage communities in these buildings. We don't want to create homes where people live in isolation and loneliness, particularly in a COVID world. So there's still work to do, but we believe there is demand, and there's a lot of demand, particularly in Leeds city centre at the moment.
Thank you. Can I bring in Councillor Campbell now, please, Colin?
Yeah, a couple of questions, one for the developer and one for officers, if possible. Can I just get clear in my mind what I think he said to Caroline, but I didn't quite catch it, that the square meterage of a studio is exactly the same as the square meterage of a one-bedroom flat?
Correct.
Right, and that's policy compliant? Just the wall. How big's a wall? How many square meters is a wall? Right. The second one is, I think, for Gillian, who's hiding behind me. Like Graham, I'm slightly concerned about 22 cars. It's a lot of people and a lot of units. Is it policy compliant?
We can bring Gillian in if for.
No, I can go.
You can do both, can you? Okay, we'll have Dalgid and Gillian can come and correct him then afterwards.
That's what usually happens. So Yeah, in terms of the space standards, the space standards actually only refer to one bed accommodation. So a studio and one bed with, you know, a separate wall is the same minimum space standard. And that's what we'd be looking for. There's no policy saying that, you know, one product is preferred over another product. It's really a focus on the size of the flat for a one-person occupancy. In terms of car parking policy, our policy for the city centre doesn't set a minimum requirement for car parking, providing the applicant can demonstrate and we can accept that there's not going to be an adverse impact on the highway network. Then in some cases, in the most sustainable locations, we can accept little or no car parking. So that will be dependent on the detailed transport assessment that will be submitted with the application. But we have in this location accepted quite low levels of parking, and the CEG scheme comes to mind, just in Holbeck, just to the south. But quite happy for Gillian to add to that.
How's your moment?
Thank you, Chair. Hello, everyone. So yes, there's no minimum standard. It's a maximum standard in the city centre, and we'd be looking at our ideal in the transport SPD is no more than half a space per unit in the city centre, but we would certainly accept less than that. I think the important issue for us to work out is that all streets within the vicinity, just because we're getting to an edge of the city centre, are appropriately covered by traffic regulation orders, so that we can't get you know, a higher demand and then an impact on surrounding streets. And we would do that by ensuring, having a look at those traffic regulation orders and ensuring we got money to ensure we could extend any restrictions if necessary. I think the biggest issue for us, though, is about servicing, because regardless of whether people own cars or not, there are going to be times when they, you know, use a car, taxi, whatever it is, you know, there'll be more use of taxis potentially for people who don't have car ownership. So we do need to make sure that the facilities for pick up and drop off and servicing are right for these very large blocks. And that's something that we'll be looking at through the planning application. At the same time, could I just say, so in terms of our draft transport SPD, we do have guidance on electric bike charging. So we have sockets for every 20 long stay cycle spaces. And there's also advice on requirements for recumbent and cargo bike parking, but not specific numbers. So it's something that in terms of detail that we would agree with the applicant during the planning stage. Thank you.
We just come on deliveries.
Thank you, Gillian. Thank you, Gillian. Most informative answer.
Sorry, could I just comment on deliveries and service strategy just for the councillors?
Do please.
So we're very conscious that the service strategy for putting effectively 500 residential units on top of each other, for want of a better phrase, creates quite, or we're concerned that it would create quite significant demand. So as part of the work that we've done in advising the client in terms of the service strategy, we've done a survey of the residential element of Bridgewater Place. So full details will be contained within the transport assessment. That's set out the methodologies, but we're comfortable that the number that we've got at is backed up by evidence, whereas I think a lot that there's no particular guidance within the draft SPD that's forthcoming. So we've just done a first principles exercise, but full detail will be contained within the transport assessment. With respect to refuse collection, we have liaised with the waste management team, and full details will be included in the application, but we're confident that the service strategy that we've got works with for the refuse and also works for the delivery demand for Amazon et al.
I wasn't going to ask a question, it was Gillian that set me off on this. When the site is fully complete and the viaduct is complete and the path comes through, there will be an easy access to the bottom of the chair's wall, actually, to where the gyrator is. And it will be a fairly nice walk when it's completed and not that far from the site. Are we making sure that areas that are residential that are near to that site or will be near to accessible from that site after the developments are done, that we are looking at restrictions there to stop anybody who lives there parking there in those areas?
I think that's probably a question for when we, for Gillian, when we get the application. But, yeah, do you want to comment on that?
I think that's the kind of information we'd be looking for in terms of just ensuring, because we're getting towards the edge of the city centre, just ensuring that we haven't got areas where you know, we've got unrestricted on-street parking. So that's exactly the kind of assessment we would need to make at that stage.
Thank you, Gillian. Kaylee, please.
Thank you, Chair. So there was mention of informal play as opposed to a formalised play area. I'd just like to know what the evidence base is for providing that, as opposed to a formalised play area with, like, you know, like swings and slides and things that kids like, and especially as it's close to quite a big stretch of water. I think it might put parents' minds at ease and also provide that sort of meeting place for parents in that area as well. I was just wondering what the evidence base is for that.
To be fair, the evidence base is this is not driven by numbers in that regard in evidence base. It's really from our experience that integrated intergenerational uses is more interesting than cordoning off play areas as being solely age group, you know, 0 to 5 or 5 to 11. It's the kind of intergenerational community that we're trying to build. And in terms of informal play, there are ways in which we can integrate level changes and the kind of exploration in terms of the senses and natural environments that we are very keen to make accessible to children in ways that support their development, whether it's about physical risk-taking or social risk-taking, things like that. So that's in the thinking, but it's not so much in the form of you know, a playground as we know it. That said, it's not a fix, and we are taking, you know, if that is a concern, we are taking feedback and you know, yes, comments for sure.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think especially with it being so close to water, I think there's no reason why you can't have both. There's no reason why you can't have formalized play and informal play, and have, because if it seems to me that you will be marketing the 3 beds towards families, so like a bit of commitment to the way that families and children especially are going to use those spaces would be really valued, I think, by the kiddos.
If I may speak again. So a couple of things. One is that we do have podium landscape. So we do have the roof terrace, which is enclosed, and we can look at making those areas also equally multi-use, but targeted more towards our younger children who might be otherwise, you know, more likely maybe to go crawling off into a canal. So they're enclosed, they're fenced off. I have a child of my own who, you know, anything he gets a foothold on, he will climb up and over and be out. The other thing is also that, yes, so in terms of formal play, because this is a site where we're hoping to bring the kind of vibrancy and intergenerational uses, we're trying to make every area, every piece of open and outdoor space something that can be used at different times by different people. And so it'll be about looking at the function of a swing. What can you swing off of? What can you, as a child, throw yourself off of from a decent height onto a safe surface, you know, without it being something that someone at a different time of day couldn't occupy. And that doesn't preclude, you know, enclosing an area in future if that is something that turns out to be desirable and really, you know, needed. And so that's why we're having these conversations now, to get a gauge of, you know, what are the different needs and how do we accommodate these different groups, different age groups and interests.
I can understand where you're coming from, but it does seem to me quite a lot like trying to erase a space set aside for children rather than integrating in children. You know what I mean? Because like kids do have very specific needs, and like they will be living there as well. So that's just my comment. Yeah, thank you.
I think it's a valid point, and I think you know, we will have 3 beds and families living here, and we have the scheme next door. So I think it's something we need to take away and look at and find a way of integrating play, and whether that's formal, informal, both. I think it's a good point, and we need to make some changes.
Okay, Graham, you wanted to come back, didn't you?
The moment's virtually passed, I think, but I just wanted to ask Gillian, when we were talking about cars, is there a sort of a calculation that tells you what is needed in the way of spaces in any given situation?
I mean, normally the only thing we go on is census data, and the census data we've currently got is very old. And any, I mean, hopefully clearly we've had the census from 2021, but we won't get the information from that for some time to come. It's going to be of limited use is the 2021 census, but hopefully not on car parking. That might be still relevant, but certainly travel to work is going to be a very limited use. So at the moment, the census data is very out of date, but it does show in certain of the city centre wards car ownership about 0.3 spaces per unit, but they're in older developments. So I think there is, you know, the strategy position really is about looking at how we can implement more car-free development and, you know, ensure that Leeds is a city where you don't need to own a car.
Caroline, please.
Chair, it's not really my place to contribute on this, but I can't resist, so I hope you just humour me for a moment. It was just the discussion that was developing around play and what kind of play areas are appropriate and suitable around developments such as these. And there is empirical evidence actually that exploratory play makes a much bigger contribution to education and thinking in areas like exploration, creativity, curiosity, risk-taking, spontaneity and independence. And that the more formalised kinds of play like swings and roundabouts are very repetitive short-term actions that children tire of very quickly. So I would make the case for exploratory play, but I am absolutely not playing down the need for a child-friendly environment which is secure and which they can consider their own space. That's very important. And I think it's a real shame that since Vicky Marsden moved on to her very well-deserved new post, we no longer in the council have an officer with responsibility for play who can advise us in situations like this. So I'll just have to do instead, Chair.
Thank you.
Job you're doing too, Caroline.
Thank you, Councillor. If I just may pipe in, I apologize, I think I misunderstood the question about it being data evidenced. What my intended response was that we haven't run the numbers and run them in terms of the expected number of children the way we would do perhaps in another place where it's driven by square meterage per child, you know, that the development might spit out. So thank you.
And finally on questions, Ryan, please.
Another thought, Chair, that came from this conversation on the slide 40. I recognise that I'm probably not cool enough to be the intended audience here, but I know there is a 100 square metre meditation room, which I would never use if I was an occupier here. But that leads me on to, we've just had a very interesting conversation about play. From a policy point of view to officers, what control would we have in terms of stipulating, say we did want to impose a playground? I'm not saying we would, but often what we would do is by section 106, we'd say there should be some sort of play facility and it's sorted out afterwards on land adjoining or something. But somebody mentioned it actually being on the top of the building in the community amenity garden, which if you've got kids playing there, I can't imagine being in the meditation room is going to help. But what powers would we have as a council to impose things like that on an actual building? Is there a policy that helps that, if we wanted to?
We have green space policies, and green space policies talk about the amount of public space that needs to come along with the development. And I think they factor in the need for play space and enough space for different functions that you might need as part of a residential community. But we don't have any specific policies saying that you should have a particular type of, play area or a particular. What we tend to do is we look at the nature of development, we look at the nature of what's proposed, and if it meets the needs of that particular site, we will, and it's part of the proposals, then we can control that detail. We can say you will provide this, and we can control the details of that provision. In the city centre, it's slightly complicated in that a lot of our developments are multi-rise developments, and our policies accept that if we applied our green space calculation, then the amount of green space will often be larger than the size of the site of the area, because it's based on densities, and the density proposals are very high. So we accept that in the city centre, we provide what we can on site as usable green space, and in the city centre that has to work really hard because it's serving different audiences, and where appropriate, we take in addition a contribution. So where particularly in high density schemes, and it may well be the case here once we go through the figures, that there's a contribution, and we then try and earmark that towards improving nearby green spaces or other provide infrastructure elsewhere. So that's the sort of policy approach. Short answer is there isn't anything specific saying for development of this type, you will need this type of play space.
Thank you, Dalton.
Is it comments, Chair?
No, but you can start comments.
Okay. Right. Well, I was waiting for comment just to say that to the developer, when you're talking about building these flats and making it as a community, I'm really pleased to hear that, because a lot of the flats, people are isolated, and we've just had a year of isolation. So I'm really glad you're trying to integrate. And with regards to the meditation room, I think that would be really welcome. Sometimes people like to go and have space of their own, apart from in the flats, high rise, there is no other communal space. So I'm pleased about that. And with regards to the play, like I was saying to Councillor Gruen, that not all play areas has to have a swing or a slide. Children use the imagination. There's other things you can do on the ground, while adults are there and sitting down and having picnics and that. So I'm pleased to hear that it don't have to, it can be a designated play areas for family, but it don't have to have a swings and slides. Can they go back to start using their imagination? And with regards to someone mentioned living near to the canal and putting up barriers, please don't. There's thousands of places like in the Caribbean where we have families that lives by water and they don't fall in, they are sensible. There's walkways and cycleways, etc. So please don't go and put any barriers. So that's what, obviously when it is approved, or if it ever get approved, etc. or built, that's what I'd like. No barriers there, please. People do use their imagination, and when you live near water, there is no way you're going to run out of a building, straight there. People do know the difference. I can tell you from in the Caribbean, we live by the water, and they don't fall in. they don't fall in. People are sensible, even family and children. So yeah, I wouldn't like to see any barriers there. Obviously, can raise and do different levels, so and different textures or gravel or whatever, so people know the difference. So that's all I just wanted to say about that. Councillor Gruen, I mentioned to her already about the studio out flats, and that she already mentioned that, so I won't go on.
Thank you. Right, I'll start by saying I'm very, very heartened by the attitude of the proposers here. They do seem to be no, at the moment they appear to be listening to us. And so I hope that translates into a proposal that we're going to find attractive when it comes as a proposal. Certainly, I think we've started off on the right foot. I would just like to nail this rat I started running about water. I did not suggest that people would be running into the water, and it's frivolous to take that attitude. I spent last 25 years, until I couldn't afford a boat any longer, floating up and down the canals of Great Britain, and you would be surprised how many people do step off canal banks into the canal, and kids do it more frequently than grown people. The Caribbean must be a wonderful place if everybody from little babies upwards don't go near the water. But I'm not asking for fences. I don't think I mentioned the word fence. What I said was design it so that, or was trying to get across, design it so that people aren't tempted, not people, sorry, children, because there's a big difference. Don't just career out of the place or down the side streets into the water. That's all I ask.
Thank you, Graham. Paul, please.
You just have to excuse me with these glasses. I've just about mastered them for Zoom, but you look very different in the flesh. So they're very focal, so you can imagine how you look in the flesh. Small windows. I think we've been encouraged that we had floor-to-ceiling windows, particularly for students. Now, I know the students are a fickle lot with regards to windows, but, you know, surely a smaller window may mean that in December you'll have to have the light on longer, so you will be using more electricity. Is it counterproductive? I think that when it comes to the full application, you'll have to justify yourself. I'm not asking you to do it now, but I think that, I know you said about the first 20 centimetres not being any use to people. I can see that at the first few levels, but when we get onto the higher stories, 20 centimetres is not 20 centimetres as far as the sun is concerned, and as far as light coming in is concerned. So that's my query around windows. It's not a question, it's just something I think you'll have to justify, because we are told that floor to ceiling windows brings in a lot of natural light, etc. Balconies. I am with Councillor Gruen on balconies. I think with what we've gone through in the last 16 months, balconies, particularly internal balconies, is what we need to be looking for. I have a friend who has a 9th-floor flat with a projecting balcony, which I do not like to go on, but it's been her only space because she's been shielding, and she said if she hadn't had that, she would have gone completely mad, because it's the only place she's been able to sit out, you know, not with anyone else, but sit out on her own. There isn't room for anyone else on that balcony anyway. With regards to the materials, I'm with Councillor Stevenson on the CGI. Maybe it's the CGI that's not right. He reminds me where I remember that building from. I've been watching too many Only Fools and Horses during lockdown. But that's where I, you know, all the 1970s apartment block in Tenerife, it seems to remember me from. But it's so long since I got to Tenerife that I've probably forgot what they look like. But it's the buff brick, I think. I think, you know, the buff brick doesn't really replicate what you are replicating in your samples of brick in Leeds. There isn't any buff brick. We are a red brick city, and I think that buff brick can be all right in the right places, but I think you just have to look at manage it, and that's having a palette in front of us, and preferably I expect we would like to see that as a little wall on site rather than a tablet in here on the table. So I think that's, because that brings me on to site visits. Members don't have an excuse not to do site visits. You can do your own because you know where these sites are, as I did on Saturday. And so I saw the site, and I say that because I am warming to Councillor Latty's, as he said, not a fence, but it is going to be an active frontage on your site, but not the towpath. The towpath is on the other side, and I can tell you from experience, there is a very naughty swan on that side at the moment that is attacking everyone who passes, including me. He or she is quite but she would be an attraction to children. Children who saw her attacking people on the other side would think I could probably get around there and deal with the situation better than the people passing. So if you're going to put play facilities on there, and I don't mind, I think you do need to put play facilities for the benefit of the families. You do need to look at whether they would be left unaccompanied in those facilities, because it would be someone else's back garden, particularly at the lower floors, where they may allow them to play, thinking they could look at them. You only need a split second to be in that canal, and I've done a lot of walking on the canal in the last 16 months. The whole stretch from Skipton to as far as it goes and further, and
Liverpool.
no, the other way, down Aaron Calder, down to Methley Junction I've been. I won't give you my memoirs, but the path can be irregular and you can find yourself in there without thinking about it. And particularly if you're a 5 or 6 year old, you may not have the water. And I appreciate what you say, Sharon, about the Caribbean, but none of us can get there at the moment to sample it. So it's a shame, isn't it? Those are my comments, Chair. I'll shut up.
You don't get comments like that on Zoom. As for the Leeds to Liverpool canal from Skipton, I used to do all my marathon training from Skipton. Train to Skipton, run home to Kirkstall, just short of 26 miles. Wonderful memories. Moving on then. David, please.
As another person that used to do the training on that stretch of the canal. Yeah. Although I do remember a colleague of mine having a collision with a bicycle and both ending up in canal, but that was their fault. Just get back to more serious things. I basically like to see an increase in 3 beds and a lot more energy information. I've got to say, what you said in answer to questions was very good, and I'm really encouraged by what you're saying all the way around. So I'm generally supportive. I think we need to see materials, and we definitely need a site visit when it comes back in an application. But take everything into consideration. I'm fairly supportive of this scheme. I'm open to the idea of having more balconies, as colleagues have said. I appreciate that if there's wind difficulties there, it might not be possible. And one little bit of advice: can you do a view from City Island? Because obviously we've got some objections already, and it might be a good idea to let panel see what the view is from City Island. That's all.
Thank you. Thank you, David. And I take you're okay with 22 parking spaces and 378 bicycles. Moving on then, Colin, please.
Can I start by saying, Chair, my enthusiasm for the end of the 90-minute rule is beginning to wane. Right. Look, question number 1 is principle, because the original site, if you recall, was an office development. I don't think any of us have expressed a view in relation to the principle of changing from, in effect, office to residential, particularly given the the developments on the adjacent site. There are a number of elements, though, of the design that I'm not quite clear about. I'm finding it really difficult to visualize what this will look like. And that's partly, I think, because we haven't seen materials, but the CGI images well, they seem slightly strange to me, in that one of them appears to be a shot in the evening sunlight, basking with the building basking in that glow. But if you look at it on that screen and that screen, they're actually completely different colors. And then a lot of the other stuff which sort of shows the relationship between the views, I'm not sure, with the best will in the world, that sort of grey and white imagery is really helping us get a picture of what the building looks like. And I do think, looking at it, you know, it looks very fussy to me. Now, I'm prepared to be convinced it isn't, but it does seem to me a very, very fussy development. I'm not mentioning windows, etc., because I think we've done that. There are 2 other elements that slightly concern me. Number 1 is, and I hate to say this, I actually think the development's wasting the canal side space. I think actually, if you think about it, at ground level, when the rest of the development takes place, the only effectively open frontage will be onto the canal side. The side that goes against the the railway viaduct is a large stone-built wall with arches in. But the canal side is open, and on the opposite side, which is nice and green on here, you've got a really nice open space. And I think actually, if it was me, I would actually pull the building back a bit to make more use of that space as the amenity, part of the amenity space for the residents and visitors. Because the space next to the canal with the building next door where the Yorkshire Post is almost unusable. Like Paul, I actually went to have a look at this yesterday, and it really is almost an unusable space. It's a path down. So I'd say that. The second thing relates to the amenity space for the residents. Now, if you look on the drawing on page 41, there appears to be quite a substantial amount of green space around here. But most of that green space, quite frankly, is related to other developments. So the railway viaduct is part of the development that's currently being undertaken. And I forgot what it's called, but it's the one on the opposite side of the viaduct.
Monk Bridge.
The bit in the middle, the bit by the canal, between the canal and the river, is an older development that has been in place for some considerable time. The space around the building that the Yorkshire Post occupy, those bits of green space are token green spaces. They've no value really. You couldn't use them for anything, but they're just there to make it look nice. So what we're talking about is a very limited area of space for residents to use. And that concerns me really, because we're talking about, there'll be about 500, well, there are 490 odd units. There'll be well in excess of 500-600 people living here. And okay, probably not this evening, but yesterday was quite a pleasant evening. And I think people would like to come out of their flat, not necessarily sit on their balcony, but actually come out of their flat, walk around, sit on the grass. And on a rough, well, if there are only 500 people there, well, you're only getting about a square metre of space each, which doesn't seem very, well, it doesn't seem much to me. Now, I think you could tweak this design. And I say, I think you could tweak the design to pull it back a bit from the canal front to make some space there, which would be a cafe, amenity space. And you can tweak the buildings slightly, twist them slightly to increase the green space, the usable green space between the buildings and the viaduct, because the green space behind and that grey shape on page 41 is actually the access to the car park underneath the site. That's really not usable green space. It's a dark canyon and not nice, quite frankly. So I think you can tweak this design to increase considerably the green area and allow much more amenity space for residents. Okay, Chair.
Fine, Colin, thank you. Peter, please.
Thanks, Chair. Just a few comments I had to. One, I think actually it's a pretty good development for what is a small site that you've had to work there with quite a lot of interesting features and other buildings nearby. I completely support the fact that this is moving to residential, because I think office buildings in the city centre, we may see some reduction in that. We're keen that the city centre obviously stays active, so if people are still living in the city centre, then that works. Looking at what we've got, I think completely supportive of the approach to parking on this development. It's not needed. It's going to be managed in terms of the people that are there. There is nowhere really you could park a car nearby. So I think if you were here, you're not going to park your car for £1 every 20 minutes in the short stay car park at the station, really. if you end up bringing one and you haven't got a parking space. And I don't really see that with this site, you're going to end up with a kind of Venice style car park 2 miles out of the city centre where everyone's parking them, because the likelihood is you're going less distance to wherever you're going than where your car would be. So yeah, I take David's point about at the other end of the viaduct, but if you're going to the supermarket or to work or wherever, it's probably quicker to walk there than it is to walk and get your car from somewhere else. There is obviously Car Club if anyone wants to take a car for a longer journey. The point about the canal is an interesting one, because there's nowhere barriers along the canal, and obviously I've got large amount of the canal in my ward out near Rodley. I've never seen anyone falling in it. I'd argue that looking at that, I mean, it strikes me that the road is probably more dangerous than the canal in this aspect. And I don't think we've ever thought about putting a huge barrier in front of the road so kids don't run into it. Now, actually, that's probably something I would support more than putting a barrier in front of the canal in that aspect, because I'd like to see the numbers maybe if we looked at the amount of people that have been injured on the roads in Leeds or the amount of people that have fallen into the canal, and maybe that's a bit of perspective that we should take on that. I'm sympathetic with Colin's view in a way that some of this could be pulled back. Actually, the point that I was thinking of is, if you look at page 42 in the slide, there's a quite narrow area between the viaduct and the building that then it's a shame it then widens up as you get in. It would be nice to see that more wide aspect alongside the viaduct, to see those cafes, to see that frontage. And I appreciate that you need a certain size of building on the site, but I'd rather in a way that side was wider where the cafes may be than the other side. As Colin says, they could tweak, move that round, and that could be a really nice opening from the canal to allow people to come out to the canal from those cafes and for people to see that activity in there in the green space rather than it being hidden away. The only final last point I'll make, I think you've covered this in a way, but just to highlight the point about adapted bikes, trikes, cargo bikes, etc., and electric bikes. Obviously, there are stairs if somebody can take their bike up stairs into that cycle parking. There is a lift if you want to use it, but that's incredibly difficult for somebody who has a bike but has to then maneuver from their bike into their wheelchair in order to try and get it into a lift, etc., or for anyone that has all their shopping in a cargo bike to then try and maneuver it into a lift. So if there's any way providing some of that cycle parking on the same level as the car parking and maybe some above for those that could use it, then I'd like that being looked into. But overall, I think it's a pretty good development. When I first saw it, I did have concerns about the look of it, the kind of brickwork, etc. It's growing on me actually, so I'd like to see more as it goes and maybe see that panel before I make a judgment on that. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. Kaylee, please.
Thank you, Chair. I don't mean to bang on about the play space stuff, but I would like to say just briefly, like I think as ward members, if the proposal came forward for all play areas to be removed from our wards, there would be uproar about it. So I think on that basis, I would support and like to see formalised play space. So in terms of the materials, I think I agree with comments that have been made. Like it is quite unclear what's going on. I am concerned about the materials sort of competing with or not sitting well alongside the viaduct and possibly other structures on the site. And then yeah, just echoing the importance of making it as easy as possible to cycle and walk. And I think definitely the having enough car spaces for people who need them due to disability or other issues is important, and I feel that's the correct level. I think in terms of the 1 and 2 bed units, I would like to see more 3-bedroom units. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Kaylee. Could we turn now to page 38, please? And there's a number of questions that officers have posed for members. The first one being, do members consider that the proposed use of the site for residential accommodation of predominantly 1 and 2 bedroom units with the resulting loss of potential office space is acceptable in principle? Yep. I hear your comments. It has been captured on more 3 bedrooms.
Yeah, I think it's 2 separate questions, isn't it? It's residential and then the housing mix. They're 2 separate questions.
Okay.
Okay. Yep. Okay, we're clear on that then. Moving on.
Yeah, sorry. I read that question as 2 separate questions because there's the losing of the office space and then there's the housing mix within the site. So it should really be 2 separate questions. Does that make sense?
Okay, so the first question, members, do members consider that the proposed use of the site for residential accommodation is acceptable in principle?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Second question, sorry.
You're doing a
Do-
great job. Carry on.
Do members support the predominantly 1-bed and 2-bed units, the approach to a residential mix?
Does that mean you want predominantly?
Okay. Okay, that's
Okay, that's clear.
I think that's clear. We'd like to see more 3 bedrooms. Okay.
Yeah, I heard during the discussion that a 1-bedroom flat is exactly the same space standards as a studio. And I think my colleagues would agree with me. We would rather the studio flats become 1-bedroom flats.
I think that has come out in comments and questions. Yep. Okay, and it is exactly the same size, you're right. A3 then, subject to confirmation of detailed proposals, do members support the emerging approach to residential amenity? Well, yep, again, we have supported and made suggestions on it, but I think in general, we probably do. Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Do members support the emerging proposals in respect of design, scale and detailing? Yes.
With the condition of the sea materials.
Indeed, and hopefully we'll have a site visit as well. Yep. And finally, do members support the proposed approach to landscaping, transportation and pedestrian connectivity?
Not quite. Not quite. I think we'd like to see more open space for residents. It may be mean shifting the buildings a little bit, but I think that's up for the developers to hear our views and come back with what we would like.
Come out in conversation for officers and developers to consider. So not quite, but we're nearly there.
I think, Chair, we'd also, all these cyclists who are going to have their
Sorry?
bikes parked, all the cyclists who are going to have their bikes parked there, I think it might be useful to see how they were going, where they were expected to, in effect, leave the building and enter the network.
And that concludes this application. It's a good thing that we did abandon the 90-minute rule, Colin, as you pointed out. So we certainly wouldn't have got there on this pre-app, would we? But thank you for that. And thank you for Damien and Richard and some of the other people who've come in. I haven't got a list of all your names, but thank you for your presentation. You've helped us to understand a lot better. Look forward to see it coming forward with perhaps suggested improvements from the panel.
Yeah, thank you very much.
And good afternoon.
Yep, thank you very much, committee.
Yeah, I think there's a request for a comfort break for 5 minutes. We'll make that 10. We can't get very far in 5, can we? And I'll allow the air to refresh itself. Okay, can we all find a seat, please? There's a couple of members who are pushed for time, but it doesn't matter. They can go when they need to go. It's not a decision making, it's an informative one. So the report is agenda item 9 and it's on page 43. Abby, can I ask you to present this report, please?
Thanks very much, Chair. Yeah, so for members who haven't met me before, my name's Abby Mladinovic. I'm a senior planner in the Policy and Plans Group, and I've been leading on the preparation of the Temple Works planning brief, which is what I'm here to talk to you about this afternoon. I'll be as quick as I can because I'm conscious of members' time. So we've brought a position statement to panel today to inform members of the preparation of a planning brief for the Temple District, which is also known as the Temple Works Comprehensive Development Zone, and that sits within the Leeds South Bank. This position statement or the covering and introductory report is intended as a precursor to the full planning brief, which will be available to members over the coming weeks. And I'll be bringing back a further sort of detailed presentation on the planning brief to the September meeting. But we thought it was an opportunity to give an introduction to what the brief is seeking to achieve and what's going to be in it as a bit of an informative, I suppose, before the consultation period starts, to give you an opportunity to provide your input to that, as well as through the formal consultation process. The intention of the planning brief is to provide a consolidated policy framework for the Temple District, which facilitates, supports and directs comprehensive regeneration within this part of Leeds South Bank, to establish development guidance for the area based on existing planning policy and guidance, to highlight key considerations for development within the wider area, which goes beyond the Temple Works planning brief boundary, or beyond the CDZ, as we call it, and to support redevelopment proposals directly linked to the repair and stabilisation of Temple Works in an enhanced setting. Finally, and I suppose the last two, to set out a strategy for regeneration of the whole area and critically to provide clarity for developers on future planning applications and to support the council's consideration of those applications. Sorry, next slide, please. So this is the map of the planning brief boundary, or the Temple Works Comprehensive Development Zone. It's the red line boundary for the site. The Comprehensive Development Zone has been agreed through a series of Executive Board resolutions as the area needed to facilitate comprehensive regeneration around Temple Works itself. The planning brief is being prepared in parallel with the work programme led by the Regeneration Service to support the stabilisation and repair of Temple Works, which, as we know, is an at-risk Grade 1 listed building, and also to facilitate a British Library North at the site, which members will have been appraised of over recent weeks. And that includes the potential use of compulsory purchase powers, as noted in the Executive Board report from March 2021. The emerging British Library proposals include a drawdown of £25 million worth of devolution monies, which have been secured to support the work of the council and the British Library. The drawdown of initial funding to support temporary stabilisation members has been agreed at the most recent Executive Board meeting, and there's going to be further legal agreements with Commercial Estates Group as the owner of Temple Works and a major landowner within this planning brief boundary, and that's going to be taken through Executive Board. But it's important to give members that context in terms of the planning brief and what we're seeking to achieve, and it's all tied in with the aspiration, which has been long-standing, to secure a sustainable and long-term future for Temple Works itself. Go to the next slide, please. Thanks. So apologies for the lines on the map, but this was just to situate Temple Works, the Temple Works Comprehensive Development Zone, or Temple District, within its wider setting. So Temple Works sits at the heart of it, and you can see it's got a good relationship to the wider city centre. It sits adjacent to Marshall's Mill and the Round Foundry. It's also next to the Tower Works site, which has just started on site. It's also in close proximity to the residential areas of Holbeck, but suffers from quite a lot of severance issues. It's not very easy to walk from the residential area of Holbeck up into this part of the city centre. That's one of the key challenges that the brief seeks to address. Just go on to the next slide, please. This is an image of the site allocations plan, allocations and identified sites. So with the exception of a bit of road space, the majority of the district is allocated or identified in the site allocations plan, which establishes the sort of principle of large-scale redevelopment of this area. The MX235 allocation, which is the big allocation covering Temple Works itself, also covers land to the south of Sweet Street. Due to the importance of that site beyond the sort of CDZ boundary, the planning brief is going to seek to provide guidance and signposting for that site as well, because it's going to be obviously really critical that that site comes forward in a way that's complementary to the overall vision for the Temple District itself. Next slide, please. And then, as set out in my report, there's a significant amount of planning policy and guidance that covers the Temple District. So as well as the development plan policies that we've got 2 SPDs that cover this area, the Holbeck South Bank SPD from 2016 and the South Bank Leeds Regeneration Framework SPD, which is from 2018. It's not the function of the planning brief to replicate all of the local and national policy and related legislation which may be relevant to Temple District. Whilst in the planning brief signposts and makes use of existing policy and guidance, emerging policy will also be considered where relevant at the time of a future application is submitted. Next slide, please. So just as a summary, it covers 11.75 hectares of land with a mix of uses. It's been agreed as the comprehensive development zone for land surrounding Temple Works. It's got a number of SAP allocations, identified sites. It's also got Holbeck conservation area that covers quite a large proportion of the site. And then there's 2 SPDs. Just next slide. I've just got some images for you now in the absence of a site visit. This is on Sweet Street looking back towards the railway. Next slide, please. This is further back from that view. You can see the commercial inn on the left-hand side, which is identified as a non-designated heritage asset in the Holbeck neighbourhood plan. And on the right, you've got the Draper's Yard building, which was formerly the 1953 building, and proposals have come forward for that site too. Next slide, please. This is at the bottom of Marshall Street, looking back towards the wider city centre. So on the left, you've got Temple Works itself, which you can see has got some scaffolding supporting it at the moment. And on the right, you've got Leodis Court, which has got light industrial uses in it at the moment. Next slide, please. This is further up Marshall Street, looking back towards Temple Works. So on the left, you've got the famous facade of Temple Works. And then you're looking effectively down a public right-of-way route which connects to back through into residential Holbeck if you go underneath the viaduct at the other end of that. Next slide, please. This is on Bath Road, looking back towards Marshall's Mill. So you've got Marshall's Mill redevelopment, which is completed, but as you can see, it's quite an unpleasant environment at the moment. Next slide, please. And then this is essentially the other end of that public right-of-way route that goes back towards Temple Works. In the sort of on the left-hand side, you've got the former school building, which is a listed building, and then you've got the sort of the cones on the roof of Temple Works in the distance there. Next slide, please. And then this is just a sort of aerial view of the area, where as much of the area as I could get in one go. As you can see, it's quite a lot of cleared land, but you've also got quite dense development on the right hand side of the image there with Temple Works pointed out. Next slide, please. So the ambition for the Temple Works Temple District Planning Brief is the creation of a vibrant and distinctive new mixed-use neighbourhood which acts as an exemplar for sustainable development, enhances the setting and secures the future of an internationally significant listed building, and delivers on a long-standing ambition for the large-scale regeneration of this area as a focal point for Leeds South Bank. And the report that panel members will have seen has got quite a detailed vision in it, but it's essentially all pointing to that aspiration for Temple Works, and making sure that development that comes forward surrounding that is complementary to the aspirations that we've got for Temple Works. Next slide, please. In terms of the structure of the brief, and this will become more clear when it's sent out and shared for public consultation in the coming weeks. But as you would typically expect, you've got the introduction, which clarifies that the planning brief boundary in relation to other planning boundaries in the area. So as I've pointed out earlier, it's got quite a number of interlocking boundaries that cover the site, and it's important for the brief to clarify what all of those mean and how they interrelate with one another. The introduction also clarifies the purpose of the brief, the status of the brief, which will ultimately be supplementary planning guidance for use by the council to help determine planning applications. In terms of strategic priorities, it's essentially linking the aspirations within the brief to the council's 3 key pillars of inclusive growth, the climate emergency, and health and well-being. The context sets out the history of Temple District, what the site's like at the moment, and the surrounding context of setting. So how does the site sit within the wider city centre context? And then also sets out the planning policy framework. So going into a little bit more detail about what those planning policies are for the area, and the development context in terms of sort of a planning application history and potential barriers to delivery. Next slide, please. In terms of the structure of the brief, then, and this is sort of the meat of it, is the development guidance. So we've got high level principles for development, which set out how the development within the area can help to achieve the vision that we've got. A climate ready and nature friendly approach. And what I mean by that is essentially championing climate ready and nature friendly principles at the front and centre of the brief. So you can essentially support sort of multi-layered infrastructure delivery, so green and blue infrastructure, etc., along with active travel all along the same route. So you get that layered approach to infrastructure delivery, which supports active travel, etc. So that's the kind of approach that we're adopting within the brief. So there's a section which clarifies what we mean by that. Public open spaces, so to be delivered at a variety of scales, including landmark public square to enhance the setting of temple works, green and blue infrastructure, so making sure that that's integrated throughout the site with identified opportunities for new green corridors and the use of water given the site's proximity to the canal and to the river. Biodiversity, so clarifying our expectations for biodiversity net gain, new habitat creation as part of a wider green and blue infrastructure network. Drainage and flood risk, so providing, setting out priorities for drainage solutions, including SUDs and mitigating against flood risk. Ground conditions, so clarifying what those are and any land contamination issues, expectations for future applications, etc. Sustainable design, so clarifying the need and the council's priority for high quality and sustainable design in line with the core strategy requirements. Connectivity and permeability, championing improved connectivity within the site and importantly and critically to surrounding residential communities as well as to the wider city centre. And then building on that connection to local communities. So not only are we looking at physical connectivity to local communities, but also trying to champion improved social connectivity alongside that with opportunities for employment and skills and building connections with any cultural assets that are likely to be developed within the Temple District. Uses, so setting out what our policy expectations are for housing, employment and supporting cultural and leisure uses within Temple District. Clarifying the core strategy's requirements on housing mix, affordable housing, accessible housing, and nationally described space standards. So heritage, supporting heritage-led regeneration and the use of regeneration to support the future of temple works in an enhanced setting. Scale and massing, so clarifying what appropriate scale and massing could be in a heritage context, clarifying fire safety expectations and wind and microclimate considerations. And then finally, design and local character, so championing high quality design in line with our policy expectations, setting out those key views, clarifying the expectation for new identity creation and materials. And then next slide, please. Not long to go, I promise. So in terms of delivery then, just I think that one of the key things to come out of the brief is that we're really supporting a comprehensive approach to development informed by a master plan. We expect that master plan will set out phasing and delivery expectations. We also champion our pre-application advice service and things like Section 106 contributions and SIL. And then we've got appendices which seek to support all the principles that we've set out in the brief and making sure that sites on the periphery of the area are also taking those principles into account. So making sure that we're championing that high quality within a wider area. And we do that through signposting and reinforcing existing planning guidance that we've got already. And like I said before, we're providing quite detailed guidance on the Sweet Street South site. And then Appendix 2 just sets out the site allocations plan requirements. Next slide, please. Thank you. So in terms of the consultation and engagement that we've got coming up, we've got dates from the 16th of August until the 27th of September. The consultation is going to be in line with our statement of community involvement and it will be mainly online based. However, we are supporting that by distributing hard copies of the brief at local destinations, so things like the community hubs, etc., as well as local community-based organisations that have agreed to put an executive summary of the brief in with their food parcels and things like that. So trying to get the message out through a variety of ways that we will be doing consultation. We're going to do three online webinars on the brief for people to come along to. People can provide feedback via the usual channels. And as I've mentioned before, I'll be coming back to the September meeting to provide a sort of detailed overview of the brief once you've had sight of it and had time to consider it. And then next slide, please. Finally, just next steps. So in terms of our next steps, we're going to proceed to the consultation, and as I've said, bring that full brief back to you, and then once the brief's been finalised after consultation, we'll bring it back for a third time just for you to note the final version of it. So it's ultimately going to be a panel that's going to be using the brief, and it's really important that you've got that information available to you. I'll leave it there, Chair. Thanks very much for your time. I'll take any questions or comments.
Thank you, Abby. I'm sure members will have some questions. Peter.
Thanks, Chair. Looking at the area, and it's good to see the whole area being covered in this, and that's welcome. The kind of streetscape is what I'm going to touch on here. Really, in that area, you've got quite a lot of roads with narrow pavements, with limited other cycle infrastructure or anything else on them, limited levels of public realm in and amongst those. What you have got is a lot of burgeoning small businesses, creative businesses, etc., and residential properties, and few bars and pubs, etc., that are quite important. And you've got a lot of industrial heritage obviously around. It's a really attractive area when you look up, but some of the roads aren't really helping that at the moment. Quite a lot of them seek to provide glorified rat runs or ways out of the city without using the major road network rather than the rest. And I think I'd just like to hear what will the approach be on rationalising really some of those routes, seeing which ones are important local routes and which ones may not be needed. So we may decide to stop up a road and use it just entirely for the benefit of getting people to those businesses and houses in the city centre better, rather than allowing people to drive through when there are other adequate routes.
Thanks, Councillor. Yeah, it's a really important point you're making. It's really salient. It's challenging connectivity wise in that area. It's an area that people, like you say, rat run through and don't necessarily stop on the way through. The full highways rationalisation will come through a master plan. So the planning brief sets out high level principles for what we want to see. So like you say, a rationalisation of the road network, making sure that it's better for pedestrians and cyclists, and that those being championed within the area. And that's one of the really big things that we're trying to bring out through the brief. And then any future master plan will have to deal with the sort of detailed reordering of the roads. So it's sort of a stepping stone in that direction within the brief, with the final details to come through a master plan and through planning applications ultimately.
Thank you, Abby. Graham, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Currently, there is the prospect perhaps of Temple Mills becoming used, shall we say, the possibility of the Northern Library. Is there anything else within this? Are we sort of clutching at straws or trying to make something out of more than what we've really got? Or is there genuinely broader interest around this site or this part of Leeds? And totally unrelated to that, why online based due to COVID-19 restrictions? We're supposed to be coming out of it, and we're here today. Why do we, and presumably an awful lot of us are consulting with our ward residents without having to resort to online. Why can't we just bite the bullet and get stuck in?
So in terms of the first question, there's the serious attitude or interest from the British Library to go into Temple Works, and that's being dealt with by the regeneration team. But this planning brief sits in that wider picture of British Library's aspirations to get into Temple Works, and alongside that, you're going to get quite a significant amount of development that's needed to support that proposal, because what you've got with Temple Works at the moment is quite a significant conservation deficit. So the cost of repairing Temple Works, it far outstrips the value of Temple Works once it's repaired. So to be able to support proposals for Temple Works and getting British Library into Temple Works, you're going to see quite a significant amount of development, and that's set out within the site allocations plan. So you've got an allocation that covers Temple Works itself and a wider area, and then a number of other smaller allocations as well. So there's quite a lot of interest in the wider area, and CEG have come forward with a proposal between Globe Road and Water Lane that the panel will have considered a couple of years ago, and that's the start of that process effectively. And CEG have got intentions to come forward with a number of other sites in the area that they own, and then there's other land ownerships as well. So there's quite a lot of interest in development within this area, and it's important for the planning brief to sort of set out what our expectations are in line with our policy requirements for that area, given the sort of changing circumstances over the last 5 years in particular. And then on to the second point, I totally appreciate the point that you've raised about consultation. It's important. We've got an interim statement of community involvement which sets out what our expectations are for consultation and engagement, and the consultation will be done in line with that. We've got 3 online events, but we're also, and something I should have mentioned in my presentation actually, but I forgot to do so, we're going along to an in-person event as well on Holbeck Moor. So we are trying to do both, but I can only work within the current health and safety guidelines that I've got as a member of staff. So I will be doing something in person, but it's going to be outside to try and get that balance right. Thanks.
I take it this is going to take into consideration aspirations that we've got, or British Library's got for that site, and clearly that means he's got to be, I mean, let's go back 30 years ago. I used to go to work that way. I used to run to work as part of my training regime, and I used to go past there. And certainly where we're talking about hasn't improved at all since then. It's just got stuck. The end of Sweet Street immensely improved, but that seems to have got stuck. And the thing is we've got to get that moving, and we've got to get the Temple Works back in operation again some way or other. I mean, last time I was in that, which must have been, well, we were this committee, wasn't it? Probably 3 or 4 years ago. I mean, it were being held up with the scaffold then, so it's important we do something there. But I take it, you know, like Collie said about wider pavements and stuff like that, the kind of thing you're going to need if you're going to have the British Library there is that kind of thing, and obviously suitable developments that are appropriate to that.
Thanks. You're absolutely right. So the brief is essentially setting out what our expectations are for that high quality. The British Library, as I understand it, are particularly keen on connectivity and trying to reinstate some of that connectivity. I don't know if any members have tried to walk from centre of Holbeck up into the area, but it's not an attractive walking environment in any way, shape or form. So one of the things that they're really particularly keen to see is making sure that those connections are there. And that's something that we'll be setting out sort of in more detail in the brief. But this is what this is all about. It's about making sure that we're getting our expectations for high quality out into the public domain, so that developers have got a clear understanding of what our expectations are in terms of proposals that come forward in the area, to provide that enhanced setting for Temple Works, and to give the British Library the comfort that they need, that they've got a high quality, high class development, high quality building, sorry, for their future proposals.
Thank you, Abby. Colin, please.
Yes, Chair. It strikes me that the bit of this site that's I suppose between Globe Lane and the River Railway Globe Road and the River Canal, etc. My recollection, having passed it this week, is that actually work's taking place there. They do seem, that development seems to have at long last started. So I'm not sure we really need to worry unduly about that end of the of this. It's the rest of it that perhaps is an issue. I suppose 2 points. Firstly, I'm just wondering, given the size of some of the stuff that we're being asked to agree with in the city centre, and the importance of Temple Works in particular, which is really the centre of this, isn't it? Are we thinking about perhaps some sort of height restriction around it so it's not swamped by a lot of tall buildings? And just picking up on, I think it was Peter's point about pavements, etc. Why don't we just talk about doing something really radical and saying this is going to be a pedestrian area. If we're talking about it being possible to build a big housing development just slightly further down the canal, why can't we talk about something like that for here? So the whole idea about any development on this site is that the hierarchy is not the hierarchy we've had in the past, which is car, people. It's people, car. So that's cycling and walking. And it's not a huge area, and I think it's an area, having, we have been down to look at Temple Works on several occasions, haven't we? But that whole bit of Holbeck, I think there, lends itself to something, to looking at it in a different way. And I just wonder if this might be the opportunity to do that. I know that might be heresy to some, but let's throw it in.
Certainly got my support on that one, Colin. Yes, people, cycle, walking, e-scooters, whatever.
I think when members see the full draft of the brief, they'll see that we've prioritised that, and I hope you provide those comments to us as part of the consultation process, so we can as well as noting them today, take them into account as part of the consultation. In terms of the tall buildings question, it's identified, well, parts of the district are identified within the draft tall buildings SPD as a preferred area for tall buildings. And what that does is helps you to generate the viability that you need to meet that conservation deficit that I talked about in terms of the restoration proposals for Temple Works. So it's inevitable that you're going to get some tall buildings, but how they relate to Temple Works is absolutely critical. And the brief sets out in some detail how that can be achieved, and that's been done alongside the conservation team and with Historic England's input through the conservation team as well. So that there's those considerations have been taken into account, but inevitably you have to get generate the viability from somewhere in terms of getting Temple Works over the line. But in terms of the pedestrian and cycle, it's totally agree with the points that have been raised by members, and hopefully you'll see that we've tried to do that through the brief in terms of active travel being the priority for this area because of its location to, it's part of the city centre and relationship to the wider city centre as well.
Sadly, Paul, please.
It's to follow on from Councillor Blackburn's point about developing it. It's well overdue, and if David was going through there on his training regime, very well overdue, and it hasn't changed since then. And you hit on it with answering Councillor, that there has to be some viability come through, and so as much as I want high quality development, there are a lot of things that have to be considered in the brief. Should there not be running alongside an enabling plan to ensure that both the development takes place and that the phasing is in some way stuck to it? It's not going to be easy, but it has to happen, and it has to happen in its entirety. Otherwise, we'll have something pop up and sit there on its own forever and ever and ever, and everything else around it, and then that will fall by the wayside and not generate other stuff because it can't generate each other, because it just needs to, there has to be the viability, and Temple Works is the centre of it, and that won't happen unless there is the stuff around it, I guess, because I guess the British Library will not come unless they have got guarantees, and we need to make sure that as much as we're getting maybe something different, maybe yeah, it's all pedestrian and cycles and scooters or whatever, if that's going to be delivered, then I'm all for it. But if it's going to get half delivered and then be left in a half finished state, it's not going to please anybody.
Thanks, Councillor. That's really important, and you've raised a really critical point there. I think if my regeneration colleagues were here, I think they would probably say what I'm about to say, which is the proposal that we've got from CEG at the moment with relation to Temple Works is probably the most realistic and viable option that we've got for bringing Temple Works back into proper and long-term future for the building. And I think taking that comprehensive approach, which is what the planning brief tries to advocate. So you look, rather than looking at individual sites within that red line boundary on their own, you look at the site as a whole. It enables you to generate, I suppose, the more strategic considerations like pedestrian cycle accessibility and green and blue infrastructure, and take those into account from a sort of a bit of a step back, which helps you, rather than trying to secure these things on a site-by-site basis. Part of that comprehensive approach enables you to do that at a sort of higher scale, which helps to balance out, like you say, that the viability that's needed and the development that's going to be needed to support the regeneration of the area. But like you say, it's a very, very fine balance.
Thank you. I haven't seen any more hands for questions. Did you want to ask a question? Go ahead, Liz, please.
Yes, a minor one, but something I'm quite keen on. There is a photograph of the commercial public house, and it is quite architecturally pleasing. Have you got any plans to incorporate that into a future development? What I am concerned about is that generally in this area, and we've just had a previous application as well, it's just tall buildings, flats and so on, no shops, no facility for people. I would have thought that could make a very good feature if it was obviously refurbished. So I just wondered what your plans were for it. I think you said it's a non-designated building of architectural interest. Is that the case?
Thanks, Councillor. That's right. Yeah, the Holbeck Neighbourhood Plan, which was adopted back in, I think it's 2018, identifies the commercial pub as a non-designated heritage asset. So proposals coming forward within that wider area will need to take that into account as part of the development proposal. As I said during my presentation, the land south of Sweet Street West doesn't fall within the comprehensive development zone for Temple Works, but does form a really, really critical site in terms of delivering that wider vision for this part of the South Bank. And so we've set out quite detailed guidance for that site related to proposals and policies that are already in existence through the development plan and planning supplementary planning documents. Sorry, but that's definitely pointed out as a consideration, like you say, because it's quite important that that's taken into account. And then just in terms of your point about the facilities and services that are available, that the brief advocates for a mixed use development. So you're not just getting residential, you're getting a mix and blend of uses, which could include facilities and services supporting that development in the future. And that's something that the brief notes and takes into account.
Any further questions? Caroline, please.
I'd just like to ask about the consultation and the form that it's going to take, because we've had quite a interesting and wide-ranging debate today. And if you're going to be doing it mainly online, is it going to be agree, disagree, or yes, no questions? How are you going to gather information that's finely tuned enough to inform me about this, very wide array of and overlaying issues?
Thanks, Councillor Gruen. It's certainly not going to be agree, disagree questions. I've tried to keep it open so people can comment on whichever part of the brief that they want to. In terms of the webinars, I was going to do a short presentation just setting out the key headlines, but as members will soon see, it's a very detailed and quite a long document, and I apologise in advance for that, but we've got an executive summary that sits alongside it, which provides a summary. But I was going to do a sort of 10-20 minute presentation and then invite an open discussion. So not seeking to shut down debate in any way, but have an open and honest conversation so people can ask the questions that they want to ask and go away and make their comments as appropriate. So trying to keep it open and honest, and certainly not trying to shut down any debate in any way. At the open session, that the in-person session, again, it's going to be an opportunity to discuss rather than answer or tick any boxes. Do you agree? Do you not agree? Type thing, which is the way I think it should be appropriate in terms of something that's as complex and as strategic as this. So trying to keep it open and with opportunities to comment on whatever people want to comment on.
Thank you, Abby. I do please, Graham.
I'm probably being incredibly dense here, but who are you going to consult with?
So there's a range of people. There's developers and landowners that have got sites within the area. There's entrenched businesses within Temple District itself. So you've got quite a lot of businesses that operate out of the viaduct arches, mechanic type businesses. You've also got quite a lot of businesses within Marshall's Mill and the Round Foundry, and a number of businesses along Globe Road and Water Lane. So they're going to be some of our stakeholders as well. We'll be going out to sort of statutory type consultees, so people like the Historic England, the Environment Agency and things like that. Also with residents within Holbeck and Beeston Hill, because they're the sort of closest residential communities that you get, as well as any operational neighbourhood forums within the area. So residents, businesses, other stakeholders as needed and as appropriate. Obviously ward members will be included in that as well, and we have been in consultation with the ward members throughout the preparation of the brief, but all members will get an email about the brief with an opportunity to have a look at it and provide comments as well.
Thank you. So from the sound of that, that's a very, very wide ranging consultation, isn't it? In types of people and types of consultees. Perhaps my earlier question was a bit fatuous then, because I would have thought that possibly the best way of reaching a crowd that big is online.
I think a blended approach and a combination of the two is probably best solution for this area. And I think if we can't get people via online, we'll try and get them in person out and about in Holbeck, one of the two.
Thank you. Can we go back then to the recommendation? And as you'll note, there is plenty of work for this panel to consider. We will be consulted in September, and we will have the planning brief sometime after that. Is there a rush for this, Abby? Does it need to happen? There seems to be fairly quickly from now on to get a planning brief or a planning permission before this panel.
So in terms of getting the brief before you, I think it's part of a wider strategy. So as I've mentioned in my presentation, there's potential use of compulsory purchase order powers taking place within the area, and that's set out in the report. I think it's part of a wider strategy. So the planning brief will come first as a stepping stone to future pre-application submissions from developers, as well as full application submission. So it's part of that wider strategy. In terms of the dates, you'll have a copy of the brief within the next couple of weeks. So we're starting on the 16th of August. So on that date, members will get a copy of it, and then there'll be an opportunity for us to have a detailed discussion at the September City Plans panel meeting.
Thank you for that. Many of us around the table have looked at this site for many years. We had applications, as David said earlier, and Colin also said. So we're absolutely delighted that hopefully we'll be moving forward. I'll keep my fingers crossed. You never take too much for granted. But I think it's a real draw if we can bring the British Library in. I won't ask what happens to the British Library in Wetherby, Ryan, when it opens. It's staying, is it? Oh, that's good news. Okay. Thank you for that presentation, Abby. I think we'd definitely like to see a progress, and we'd certainly like to have some involvement on it. It's a huge opportunity from the city. And as David said, nothing has changed for 15 years. Those photographs of dark arches, and you probably took them on a very poor day, but I mean, that's what it looks like most of the time. So I think you've captured that rather well, but thank you again for your presentation. And with that, I can conclude that that ends the meeting. Just to remind you, the date of the next meeting is the 2nd of September at 1:30. but it's likely, and I shall be doing my bit, that we'll have a site visit that morning as well. I don't know how we're going to manage it. We'll have to satisfy the COVID security police, but we'll manage it somehow. Paul.
Because obviously they were printed for COVID, and the council is strapped for cash and have two areas to rub together apparently. Do we still need to get these printed? I noticed these members have been using them today, but they are obviously quite expensive. I don't know whether we need to continue with this point. If you sat there at the end, I found them quite useful. Normally sort of made it together that way.
Yeah.
You can see it on there or see it on screen. If you like on end here, it's pretty difficult. So we can keep it until we can get closer. Yeah. More intimate.
Okay, I'd just say on that one that we do see the images on television when we're at the actual panel, but it's handy having these at home when it comes with the agendas, so we can look at it, you know, and perhaps study it a bit more carefully than we can around there. You know, next slide, please. We have a minimum of 1-2 minutes maybe for each one. So I think it has a value. But, you know, unless people are telling me otherwise, I'd argue that we should continue. Peter.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to say, Chair, is I'm easy whether it's printed or not, but we previously didn't receive them with the papers, and actually being able to read the paper while looking at the picture is very valuable. So if somebody's sending them all around, yeah,
Members got the whole plans sent to them.
Absolutely. But yeah, don't mind if they're emailed or not, but I think we should upload the presentations to public access as we have been doing, which I don't think we did previously before the panel, and members should receive the copies of them so that they can look at the CGIs, etc. Otherwise, as you say, we get a minute to look at the picture, which we haven't seen beforehand. So that's been a real benefit out of the approach.
Liz isn't here, so she can't answer that question. John, do you have any comments on it?
Well,
it definitely has a value.
It has a value to members, that's clear. It also has an impact in terms of workload for officers as well. So the intention was to take all of these types of issues to the next joint chairs meeting for discussion about what we sort of carry on with, or what we now relinquish now that we're back in the room, as it were. Certainly we were going to talk about site visits. That's quite clear today that members would like that to resume as quickly as possible. And we were going to talk about the image presentations as well. So we can discuss that further, but today's comments are noted.
And Graham said, and the design workshop. But there isn't a chairs meeting. It's been cancelled 12th of August till the end of August. So I guess we will get these for the next meeting, and then we'll take it from there.
Carry on as we are for now until we've had that discussion. Yeah.
Okay. All right. And don't forget the design workshop. Such a delight to have you all around one table. I've really enjoyed it, honestly. It's fantastic. So thank you. I know we were a bit long-winded on our applications, longer than normal, but every question and every comment was very valuable, and thank you for that. Safe journey home.